when I was doing that part. I was in the street, but I look like me, right? Yeah. I don't have black hair and white hair. And so I went.
In the world of cinema, where the Golden Oscar statuette is considered the ultimate pinnacle of glory, Glenn Close has become Hollywood's greatest paradox. For more than 4 decades, she has carved her name into history with searing, complex, haunting performances that redefined what true acting means. She holds 3 Emmys, 3 Tonys, 3 Golden Globes, and 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards. Yet 8 times nominated for an Oscar, 8 times it was someone else's name that was called. To many, Glenn Close is the greatest runner-up Hollywood has ever known. But the real tragedy of Glenn Close is not the trophies that slipped from her grasp. It began in childhood, trapped within the invisible chains of a strict religious cult, where emotions were policed and dreams suffocated. It stretched across 3 broken marriages, fleeting romances, and a private life marked by solitude. The wound cut deeper still when her own family battled mental illness, leaving her not only with haunting memories, but also with a lifelong burden of responsibility. On screen, she was Alex Forrest, the lover who terrified the world, the Marquise de Merteuil, the embodiment of cruelty, Cruella de Vil, the nightmare etched into millions of childhoods. But when the velvet curtain fell, Glenn Close was simply a woman forcing herself to stand tall, transforming wounds into characters and hiding her tears behind the spotlight. Her journey has never been just about chasing great roles. It has been a quiet war to hold on to identity, to escape the shadows of her youth, and to turn trauma into strength. Glenn Close steps onto stage and screen not merely as an actress, but as a storyteller, using the scars of her soul as her language. And perhaps that is what makes her immortal, even without ever holding an Oscar in her hands. In the blinding light of her career, few people know that Glenn Close was once a child imprisoned by invisible chains. Glenn Close was born on March 19, 1947 in Greenwich, Connecticut, into a family that seemed solid on the surface, but was riddled with fractures. Her grandfather's old stone house, where she grew up, stood on a spacious, peaceful plot of land, yet it never offered the warmth or safety a child needs. Her father, William Taliaferro Close, was a renowned doctor who studied at Harvard and later became the personal physician to President Mobutu Sese Seko in Congo. His work kept him away for long periods and eventually dragged the family into a life of instability, constantly moving between America and Africa. Her mother, Elizabeth Mary Hester Bettine, was a gentle yet reserved woman, more inclined to endure than to share, leaving the children to navigate the strict rules laid down by their father. At the age of 7, Glenn and her siblings were placed into what she would later call a spiritual prison, the Moral Rearmament, MRA, movement. Officially, it was a moral and religious organization calling for self-discipline and social reform. But to Glenn, it was a cult of total control, where children were forced into iron discipline, every action and thought subject to the collective will. For 15 years, she was virtually stripped of her childhood. There were no carefree games, no spontaneous joys, only long prayers, endless sermons about sin and redemption. Glenn once described how, as a child, she felt like she was wearing a tight coat all day long, never allowed to take it off to breathe freely. In her teenage years, the Close family faced yet another upheaval. Her father took on the post in Congo, becoming the personal doctor to one of Africa's most powerful dictators. That meant Glenn had to attend boarding school far from home, first in Switzerland, then back in the United States. Each school, each dormitory was nothing more than a stopover, never a home. She lived in constant dislocation, without roots, without an anchor of affection. This instability shaped her habit of careful observation and emotional reserve, because silence and adaptability were the only ways to survive. And yet, in rare openings of youth, Glenn found light in art. She joined the singing group Up With People, then formed a small band called the Green Glen Singers, performing traditional songs at gatherings. Each time she stood before an audience, still shy but present, she felt a fleeting freedom, a moment when she could live as herself, no longer hidden behind obedience. In 1965, Glenn graduated from Rosemary Hall, a girls' school known for its discipline. At first, she planned to study anthropology, but then she enrolled at the College of William and Mary, where fate truly shifted. There, she met Professor Howard Scammon, a mentor, who saw in the quiet young woman an untapped force waiting to be unleashed. He encouraged her to try theater, not as a pastime, but as a form of healing. Slowly, Glenn realized that on stage, she was no longer the child shackled by a cult, but a human being free to experience the full range of emotions. One moment remained etched in her memory. One evening, Glenn happened to see Katharine Hepburn appear on The Dick Cavett Show. Hepburn was not only a star, but a strong, intelligent woman who dared to defy conventions. In her, Glenn glimpsed the future she longed for, a free artist, unwilling to let anyone else decide her destiny. From that instant, Glenn knew there was no turning back. A childhood of restraints and years of wandering became the foundation of Glenn Close's art. She learned to hide, then to reveal, to break, then to rise. And for her, the stage was never just a career, it was liberation, the doorway through which a captive soul finally stepped into the light. From the moment she discovered the breath of freedom on her college stage, Glenn Close stepped onto the artistic path as if it were the only escape for a soul suppressed throughout childhood. After graduating from the College of William and Mary in 1974, she did not take the safe route expected of an educated American woman at the time. Instead, she chose to remain in New York, enduring cramped living conditions while nurturing her dream of the stage. In those early years, Glenn took only small roles and worked countless side jobs to survive, from waiting tables to singing for hire. Yet for her, the stage was never about making a living. It was about truly existing, a space where emotions, long locked away, could finally be set free. That persistence was soon rewarded, though not easily. In her first days on Broadway, Glenn Close was just another fresh face, barely noticed, often relegated to supporting parts or filling in last minute when leads were absent. And yet, in a short time, audiences and critics recognized something different. She didn't perform like others. She disappeared entirely, leaving only the character in her place. In the 1974 play, Love for Love, Glenn transformed into Angelica with such refinement that the audience was stunned. Every glance, every breath, every small gesture carried a weight of truth, to the point that some said, when Glenn stepped on stage, the room seemed to shrink until only her character remained. As her stage career progressed, Glenn gradually earned the reputation of being the woman of many masks. She never needed flamboyance or glitter. Instead, she tore open the inner life of her characters, peeling away shards of emotion until the pain and conflict were laid bare, allowing audiences to recognize themselves within. Critics of the time described her as an actress with no distance from her character, a rarity in New York's fiercely competitive theater scene. By the early 1980s, with her reputation firmly established, Hollywood unexpectedly came calling. Producers invited her to audition for The World According to Garp, 1982. In her first feature film appearance, she played Jenny Fields, a woman unwilling to live by any societal norm, both strong-willed and rebellious. Her total immersion and unnervingly natural performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, a remarkable feat for a cinematic newcomer. She didn't stop there. In the following 2 years, Glenn continued to astonish Hollywood. The Big Chill, 1983, placed her at the heart of a disillusioned post-Vietnam generation, while The Natural, 1984, showed she could embody gentler, emotionally rich roles with equal conviction. The result? 3 consecutive years, 3 Oscar nominations. Critics called it a miraculous hat trick, the kind of start any actor would dream of. Yet Glenn's film career was never a bed of roses. She consistently chose difficult roles, characters marked by turmoil, sometimes to the point of extremity, because it was the only way she could excavate her own past. Having grown up under the grip of a controlling religious sect, she found kinship in women who were confined, lost, or desperately yearning for freedom. This made her both mesmerizing and unsettling to audiences, and raised a lingering question. Was Glenn Close truly acting, or simply unleashing what she had once endured? It was at this crossroads that Glenn began the long journey of an actress who never stopped testing her limits, ultimately becoming an icon. And only a few years later, her role in Fatal Attraction would make her name immortal, but also etch into her life a scar that could never be erased. After 3 consecutive Oscar nominations, Glenn Close did not choose to bask in the glow of cinema, but steadfastly returned to the stage, the place she considered her true home. In 1984, alongside Jeremy Irons under the direction of Mike Nichols, she breathed new life into The Real Thing. The role earned Glenn her first Tony Award for Best Actress in a Play, affirming that she was not only Hollywood's new star, but also a master of the stage. The play ran for 566 performances, a staggering number that reflected both the magnetism and endurance of a star who combined iron discipline with artistic fire. But the most powerful blow to the psyche of global audiences would come 3 years later with Fatal Attraction, 1987. At first, Glenn wasn't even the top choice for the role of Alex Forrest. Studios wanted a more sexy box office name, someone already associated with glamorous sensual roles. Glenn, with her intellectual face, stern eyes, and theatrical bearing, was considered too serious for a role of an unhinged lover. Yet it was precisely that doubt that pushed her to prove otherwise. Alex was not just a character, but a fractured being waiting to be unearthed. Glenn personally sought out psychiatrists, attended therapy sessions, and studied literature on personality disorders before meticulously building a character dossier. Who Alex once was, how she had loved, how she had been wounded, and why love turned into destruction. She wanted audiences to see a human being, not a monster. Every scene she filmed was not merely acting, but a psychological dissection, peeling back layers of pain, forcing herself into the tragedy of a woman who could not endure abandonment. Her extreme immersion brought her close to danger on set. During one violent struggle scene with Michael Douglas, she crashed into a mirror and lost consciousness. Glenn was rushed to the hospital in shock, only to receive stunning news. She was pregnant. Balancing the portrayal of a woman unraveling while secretly carrying such fragile hope placed Glenn under crushing psychological strain. She later admitted there were nights when she left the set, sitting alone in the dark, trembling, unsure where the character ended and she began. The torment didn't stop there. Near the film's completion, the studio decided to change the ending. Alex Forrest, whom Glenn had built as a mentally ill woman deserving of compassion, was rewritten into a pure villain, killed off for audience satisfaction. Glenn fiercely opposed the decision, even writing handwritten letters to the director and producers, insisting it betrayed the character and reduced her to a caricature. For 2 weeks, she fought, wept, and pleaded to preserve the complexity she had crafted. But commerce won out. Glenn reluctantly filmed the new ending, in a room filled with guns, knives, and a suffocating silence. When released, Fatal Attraction became a global phenomenon. The box office shattered expectations, debates erupted, and the phrase "bunny boiler," referring to Alex boiling her lover's daughter's pet rabbit, entered the cultural dictionary. Audiences were terrified, fascinated, and unable to look away from the deranged woman on screen. And in that moment, Glenn Close, with all her intensity, contradictions, and sacrifice, etched her name into cinematic history, leaving one of the most complex, iconic female antagonists of all time. She didn't stop there. Just a year after Fatal Attraction, Glenn again commanded Hollywood's attention with Dangerous Liaisons, 1988. Based on the novel by Choderlos de Laclos, she embodied the Marquise de Merteuil, a character far more than a villain, but the embodiment of hidden female power in 18th century French aristocracy, where desire, political games, and intricate revenge ruled everything. Glenn's Merteuil was icy to the point of cruelty, yet intelligent, seductive, and mesmerizing. She was a woman who used intellect and calculation to survive in a male-dominated world, turning every relationship into a pawn in her power game. Glenn didn't just act through razor-sharp dialogue, but through her eyes, a raised brow, a half-smile that could chill to the bone. Behind that coldness lay a deep abyss of longing, a woman who craved love yet refused ever to be subdued. This contradiction made the character haunting. Audiences despised her, yet could not look away. The role earned Glenn another Oscar nomination and widespread critical acclaim as one of the most finely crafted performances of the 1980s. Critic Roger Ebert remarked that Glenn had made Merteuil an emblem of female power distorted by society, both terrifying and worthy of understanding. As the 1990s began, Glenn refused to be bound by any single type of role. She plunged into Shakespeare, playing Gertrude in Hamlet, 1990, embodying the sorrow, conflict, and tragedy of a royal mother torn between power and maternal instinct. That same year, she appeared in Reversal of Fortune, based on a true case, delivering a chillingly precise and restrained performance that deepened a controversial legal drama. Her dominance wasn't confined to film. Glenn continued to reign on stage, most notably with Death and the Maiden, 1992, where she played Paulina, a woman haunted by memories of torture, torn between the need for justice and the grip of unrelenting fear. The role demanded constant shifts in emotion, from panic to icy calm, from thirst for revenge to yearning for release. Glenn conveyed it not only through dialogue, but through breath, through the trembling of her hands. This total immersion earned her a second Tony Award, proof that whether on screen or stage, she could transform pain and trauma into the highest form of art. Her theatrical triumph reached new heights when Glenn Close stepped into the world of Sunset Boulevard, 1994. As Norma Desmond, the once glorious silent film star now abandoned in her decaying mansion, trapped in illusions of faded stardom, Glenn did not merely play the role, she nearly became it. She poured into Norma her own reservoir of loneliness, of feeling forgotten, of obsession with the stage's glow. Every gesture, glance, and broken laugh chilled audiences, as though she were bearing her own shadows alongside the characters. The musical quickly became a Broadway phenomenon, earning Glenn her third Tony and setting box office records. Critics hailed it as a performance where the line between art and truth disappeared, for Glenn had rendered Norma Desmond both pitiable and terrifying, a living emblem of Hollywood's tragedies. On stage, she upheld strict discipline, once halting a performance to demand a spectator turn off a camera flash, declaring the stage sacred, not to be desecrated. 2 decades later, in 2017, Glenn returned to Norma Desmond in a new production of Sunset Boulevard. Though in her 70s, she carried the same ferocity and precision. This revival was seen as a statement that for Glenn Close, the stage was not merely a workplace, but a temple where she entrusted the sanctity of art itself. Audiences left the theater in stunned silence, as if they had just witnessed a woman truly live and die on stage. While the theater immortalized her in legendary roles, cinema introduced Glenn to an entirely new generation. In 1996, she appeared in 101 Dalmatians, cloaked in massive furs, with a piercing gaze and a wicked grin, as Cruella de Vil. This villain, both menacing and darkly comedic, did not just deliver Disney a blockbuster, but instantly became one of the studio's timeless icons. Children were both frightened and delighted, while adults marveled at Glenn's transformation. An actress capable of leaping from the tragic depth of Norma Desmond to the exaggerated theatrics of Cruella with electrifying ease. With Cruella, Glenn Close reached audiences who had never seen the fury of Fatal Attraction or the precision of dangerous Liaisons, embedding herself into the childhood memories of millions. After leaving her mark as Cruella, Glenn Close stepped away from blockbuster entertainment to search for new ground. That path led her to television. In 2005, she appeared in the final season of The Shield as Monica Rawling, a tough, icy police captain, yet still carrying inner fractures. Her appearance was a breakthrough, signaling that Glenn was ready to shatter the old prejudice that film stars don't do television. 2 years later, Damages, 2007 to 2012, made Glenn the centerpiece of the small screen. As attorney Patty Hughes, she built the image of a steel woman, seductive, ruthless, and haunting to the core. The show used a non-linear narrative structure, guiding audiences through spirals of past, present, and future, turning each episode into a tense psychological game. Alongside Glenn was a heavyweight cast: Ted Danson, William Hurt, Martin Short, John Goodman, together creating a dark television landscape where power and morality were in constant conflict. With Patty Hughes, Glenn Close helped lay the foundation for American television's golden age, proving that TV series could match cinema in depth and artistic weight. Not stopping there, Glenn reaffirmed her courage by returning to film, late but fierce. With Albert Nobbs' 2011, she not only played the lead role, but also co-wrote the screenplay and contributed a song. she transformed into a woman forced to live, disguised as a man in 19th century Ireland to survive. A grueling role that exposed utter loneliness. The film brought her another Oscar nomination, but more importantly, it proved Glenn never stopped challenging herself even in her 60s. Her final cinematic peak came with The Wife, 2017. As Joan Castleman, the wife who spent her life in the shadow of her husband's glory, Glenn delivered a performance of a boiling heart behind a calm face. Serene expression, slight smile, but eyes burning with hidden fire. The role earned her the Golden Globe, SAG, Indie Spirit, Critics' Choice, and numerous other awards, along with Oscar and BAFTA nominations. Critics unanimously declared it one of the greatest performances of her career. And yet, just as her professional triumphs shone brighter than ever, shadows still lingered. For Glenn Close was not only a star, she was also a woman who had emerged from a childhood bound in chains, from marriages that collapsed, and from a family engulfed in mental illness. And it is there, in the hidden corners of her private life, that we see the true price she has paid to stand at the summit today. Yet, after the ovations of stage and screen, Glenn Close still had to return to confront the fractured parts of her private life. In 1969, barely in her early 20s, she entered her first marriage with musician Cabot Wade. They met at friendly gatherings where Glenn often brought her guitar and sang the songs she loved. Cabot was drawn to Glenn's intelligence, her blend of thoughtfulness and quiet romanticism, while she admired his free-spirited nature, his artistic soul, and the sense of liberation he embodied. Love came quickly and intensely, as though Glenn were trying to make up for all the years of repression. The two soon decided to marry. In 1969, at just 22 years old, Glenn held a simple wedding with Cabot. No fanfare, only friends and a handful of family members present. For Glenn, Cabot seemed to symbolize the freedom she had only just reclaimed. A man unbound, living through music, ready to give her a small family where she could begin anew. Their early married days were filled with music. Glenn would spend hours listening to Cabot practice guitar, while he loved to watch his wife absorbed in scripts or softly humming to herself. They spoke of the future, of performing together, even dreamed of having children and creating a home where art and family would blend as one. But reality soon proved harsher than the dream. Glenn, still young and inexperienced in the meaning of lasting love, began to feel the wide gulf between them. Cabot was a dreamer, content to drift along with his music, while Glenn felt emptiness and unease, wounds from her childhood still unhealed. She yearned for a place in the world, for an identity of her own, yet marriage seemed to pull her back into another form of confinement. Conflicts arose. Cabot longed for a simple life, while Glenn was driven by the urge to define herself. Tender conversations slowly turned into arguments, and silence stretched between them. Glenn realized she had rushed into marriage too young, and now she was paying the price. The marriage lasted only 2 years, from 1969 to 1971, before it quietly dissolved. They had no children, but Glenn carried from that relationship a lingering pain. The disillusionment of discovering that love could not fill the void of childhood, and that marriage was no cure for loneliness. She would later admit, "I got married before I even knew what love was." The separation from Cabot Wade left Glenn Close with her first indelible scar, making her more cautious and guarded in matters of the heart. From then on, She began to channel all her energy into her career, as though immersing herself in the stage lights was the only way to fill the emptiness within her soul. After her first marriage collapsed, Glenn Close poured almost all of herself into her career. She took steady steps on the Broadway stage, then crossed into Hollywood, where she landed role after role that would define her legacy. But behind the spotlight, Glenn was still a woman longing for a family, a place to lean on after nights of exhausting performances. And it was during this upward climb in her career that she met James Marlis, a businessman, a successful, composed man who seemed capable of giving Glenn the stability she had always sought. They met at an art world party in New York in the early 1980s. Glenn was drawn to James's maturity and refined demeanor, so different from the free-spirited artistic romances she had known before. James, in turn, was captivated by Glenn's intelligence and charm, not just as a rising actress, but as a woman of depth. Their love unfolded quietly and maturely, away from the tabloids. But enough to make Glenn believe that this time, she had finally found a true home. In 1984, they were married. It was the very moment Glenn was entering her first peak in Hollywood with the big chill and the natural. Her marriage to James Marlis felt like a promise of balance. By day, she inhabited fierce roles. By night, she would return to peace and stability. Glenn even expressed a desire to have children with James, hoping to fill the void of maternal love she had never fully known in her own childhood. But reality did not match expectation. James was a busy businessman, accustomed to an orderly life and conventional social circles. Glenn was the opposite, an artist to the core, who threw herself wholly into her work, carrying with her wounds still unhealed from childhood and her first marriage. The differences between them quickly became clear. Glenn often came home from long, draining days on set seeking empathy, only to encounter an invisible distance from her husband. James wanted a stable wife, while Glenn was a woman who could never be confined within such boundaries. Conversations grew shorter, replaced by silence. Glenn realized she was trapped in the same cycle once again, searching for a home, only to discover she never truly belonged. By 1987, after 3 years, the marriage ended. They had no children, and Glenn once more stepped out of a marriage with a broken heart. If her first marriage to Cabot Wade was the lesson of youthful impulsiveness, her marriage to James Marlis left a different scar. The disillusionment of finding that even as an adult, more mature and grounded, she still could not hold on to a home. Glenn walked away with the lingering pain that perhaps the wounds of her childhood and the complicated soul of an artist would always stand as barriers to ordinary happiness. After stepping away from her second marriage, Glenn Close chose a more private life, avoiding noisy relationships. She poured her energy into stage and film, letting art become her refuge. Yet her heart still longed for a lasting bond. In 1995, during a television project, she met Steve Beers, a producer and TV director who quickly gave her a sense of trust. Unlike the romantic Cabot Wade or the refined James Marlis, Steve offered Glenn simplicity and understanding. He was no stranger to the hectic rhythm of show business, but he was calm enough to share its quieter moments with her. Their relationship blossomed slowly and maturely. They did not rush into marriage, instead giving themselves time to truly know each other, allowing Glenn to feel safe after 2 painful breakups. By the late 1990s, Glenn and Steve were engaged. she began to let herself believe that perhaps he would be the man to walk the entire road with her, the partner who could let her pursue art while also living an ordinary life. During their years together, Glenn often appeared with Steve at events, and her rare smile at those times carried a lightness seldom seen. Friends recalled how Steve had a way of making Glenn relax, of freeing her from the weight she always carried under the spotlight. But that belief, too, could not withstand reality. Glenn, at her core, was an artist driven by the relentless urge to create, while Steve wanted the steadiness of family life. The distance between them grew, and though engaged for 4 years, they never married. In 1999, the relationship ended quietly. For Glenn, parting with Steve Beers left another deep scar, the unsettling realization that perhaps she would never find peace in love. Though they had no children together, the relationship remained a memorable chapter, a time when she dared to trust, dared to open her heart, only to face once again the truth that love, for her, was never enough to hold on. After many years of turbulent relationships and breakups that left lasting scars, Glenn Close seemed to have finally found a safe harbor when she met David Evans Shaw, a businessman, philanthropist, and healthcare investor in the early 2000s. He did not belong to the artistic world, was untouched by Hollywood's glitter and chaos, but was instead a mature, successful man who could offer Glenn the stability she had long craved. They met at a community event where Glenn participated as an advocate for arts programs, while David attended as a sponsor of medical research projects. His calmness and intellectual demeanor made Glenn feel safe, while he was drawn to the experienced yet radiant woman whose eyes still burned with artistic passion. After a few years of discreet dating, in 2006, they held a simple wedding in Maine, David's home state. To friends and the media, this seemed like a long-awaited turning point. Glenn Close had finally found her home. Married life with David Shaw was markedly different from her previous unions. Glenn often withdrew from the bustle of Hollywood to live in their countryside home, where she tended flowers, cared for pets, and enjoyed the rhythms of ordinary life. She once shared that during this period she felt like a normal woman, something her long career had never allowed her. David also accompanied her in some social initiatives, particularly campaigns raising awareness of mental health, a cause Glenn was deeply committed to. Yet after nearly a decade, distance began to creep in. Glenn remained the artist who could not stop creating, constantly filming and performing, while David remained immersed in the worlds of business and scientific research. Their paths gradually became parallel, no longer intersecting as they once had. Conversations grew sparse. Companionship turned into separation. In 2015, they decided to divorce. There was no scandal, no noise, just a quiet parting after 9 years together. For Glenn, this had been her longest marriage and her greatest hope, yet in the end, it too could not be preserved. After 3 marriages and 1 broken engagement, she came to understand that conjugal happiness seemed always to elude her, leaving behind a loneliness she could scarcely name. From then on, Glenn Close chose to live alone, with her daughter Annie and her work, as though she had accepted that the stage lights could, in some way, make up for the emptiness that marriage had never managed to fill. Amid unfinished marriages and lingering uncertainty, Glenn Close still had one important relationship that left a deep mark: her bond with producer John Stark. They met in the late 1980s when Glenn was soaring in her career but empty in her private life. Though they never married, that relationship gave her the most precious gift of all, her daughter, Annie Stark, born in 1988. Annie's arrival transformed Glenn. A woman who had poured herself into complex roles and endured loneliness after broken marriages now had a reason to soften again. She gave her daughter the warmth and devotion she herself had been denied in childhood, always present to guide Annie in an environment rich with both art and affection. For Glenn, Annie was not only her child, but also her chance to rewrite an unfinished chapter of her own life, the chapter of a true family. As she grew up, Annie chose to follow the artistic path of her mother. Remarkably, in The Wife, 2017, the film that brought Glenn Close a cascade of major awards, Annie portrayed the young Joan Castleman, the youthful version of the very character Glenn played. Seeing mother and daughter, two generations, appear together in a story about a woman's pain in the shadow of another created an emotional layer of meaning. As though Glenn were passing down to her daughter both her acting legacy and the unspoken truths about women's silent sacrifices. In 2018, Annie Stark married at the family estate in Bedford Hills, New York. Glenn Close stood there, not just as a legendary star, but as a proud mother watching her daughter step into a new chapter of life. In interviews, she often spoke of Annie with eyes full of pride and gratitude. Glenn saw her daughter not only as a source of comfort, but also as a trusted advisor, someone who could tell her the truth, offer frank feedback about roles or career decisions, and above all, serve as her strongest emotional anchor. After all the heartbreak, Annie is what convinced Glenn Close that there is one kind of love that never betrays, a mother's love. And perhaps, without Annie, Glenn might never have been able to stand firm through the long years of fierce artistry and fragile private life. But Glenn Close's personal life was not defined only by the pain of love. The greatest tragedy came from within her own family. Her younger sister, Jessie, had long lived in the shadows of bipolar disorder. But it wasn't until 2004, when Jessie was already 51, that she finally received an official diagnosis. Before that, she had endured multiple failed marriages, long stretches of deep depression, and even admitted that at times she had considered ending her life. The wound did not stop with one generation. Jessie's son, Callan Pick, was also diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a condition combining symptoms of schizophrenia and mood disorder. Mental illness seemed like a dark cloud hanging over the family, one already marked on their maternal side by a history of psychiatric struggles. Glenn did not stand aside. She chose to remain close, to share and walk alongside her sister. In 2019, Glenn moved to Bozeman, Montana, where Jessie lived, so she could be near her siblings and serve as Jessie's anchor during her hardest years. She later shared that it was only by facing her sister's suffering directly that she truly understood the destructive power of stigma and silence around mental health. Out of that realization, Glenn founded Bring Change to Mind, BC2M, in 2010, with the mission of breaking stigma and raising awareness about mental health. In less than a decade, BC2M had launched 7 nationwide PSA campaigns, reaching an estimated 4 billion impressions, an extraordinary figure reflecting its social resonance. Alongside this, BC2M brought mental health education programs to 540 schools across 43 states, reaching nearly 100,000 students. Participating schools received $500 grants, access to the Headspace platform, and specialized resource portals to support their students. Surveys and focus group discussions, FGDS, conducted by the organization revealed clear changes, more open attitudes, more genuine concern, and, notably, 61.5% of graduating students expressed interest in pursuing careers related to mental health. Through her own personal experience, Glenn Close transformed private pain into a social movement, helping hundreds of thousands of young people feel that they no longer had to remain silent in the face of psychological crises. Alongside BC2M, Glenn has also devoted herself to other causes. She has been a strong voice for animal rights and environmental protection through her work with the Wildlife Conservation Society, WCS, and ASPCA. She has also actively supported arts education, especially at the College of William and Mary, the school that first opened the path of acting for her. These efforts earned her recognition in Time magazine's Time 100 list in 2019, proof that Glenn Close is not only a star of the screen but also a committed citizen, turning personal tragedy into a force for social change. In her 70s, Glenn Close still refuses to stop. After countless performances on Broadway as Norma Desmond, first in 1994, then in a triumphant return in 2017, she has continued to nurture the dream of bringing Sunset Boulevard to the big screen. In 2022, that long-awaited film adaptation finally began production, marking a haunting reunion between Glenn and the silent film star lost in delusion. For her, this was not just another role, but nearly 3 decades of dialogue with darkness and the fear of being forgotten. Through 2023 to 2024, Glenn continued to appear steadily on the big screen with a variety of projects. In Lee Daniels's The Deliverance, she immersed herself in a harrowing tale of faith and social demons. In Back in Action, marking the return of Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz, Glenn brought a distinctive layer of depth, proving that she could stand alongside any star of any generation without missing a beat. And when Netflix announced Remarkably Bright Creatures, directed by Olivia Newman with Sally Field in the lead role, Glenn was not only part of the cast, but also served as a producer, guiding the project from behind the scenes. It was a natural transition. After a lifetime of acting, she wanted to pass on her experience and show future generations that art is a responsibility, not merely a spotlight. In January 2025, she appeared radiant on stage at the Movies for Grown-Ups Awards to receive the Career Achievement Award, a prize honoring more than half a century of artistic dedication. Holding the trophy, Glenn was celebrated not just as a legend, but as living proof of endurance. Still creating, still standing strong in a world that has never been easy for older women. Just weeks later, audiences were talking about her again at the 2025 Golden Globes. This time, not for a new role, but for a speech considered too candid, trimmed down for the television broadcast. In that moment, people realized that Glenn Close in real life was much like the characters she has portrayed: uncompromising, authentic, and never afraid to speak her mind. Her film career in 2025 has also been filled with major projects. At the beginning of the year, Netflix released the action comedy Back in Action, with Glenn starring alongside Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz. The film quickly drew millions of views within days, proving she could step into the modern entertainment space while maintaining her magnetic presence. By September 2025, Glenn once again surprised audiences with her appearance at the Toronto International Film Festival for the premiere of Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery. In the latest installment of the hit detective franchise, she plays Martha Delacroix, a character shrouded in secrets and moral conflict. Her presence added weight to the film, which critics predicted would be even more layered than its predecessors. At an age when many of her contemporaries have retreated from the spotlight, Glenn Close continues moving forward, collecting lifetime honors, taking on new roles, and venturing into production. Perhaps what sets her apart is not only her talent, but her conviction that art still has so much left for her to give. Glenn Close in 2025 is not only a living legend, but also living proof that passion and courage can defy time itself. People may endlessly debate whether Glenn Close truly deserves an Academy Award, but few would deny that she has changed the way the world views women on screen. On Broadway, she is among the rare artists to win 3 Tony Awards, solidifying her status as a goddess of the stage, with unforgettable roles such as Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard. On film, from Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction and the Marquise de Merteuil in Dangerous Liaisons, to Cruella de Vil in 101 Dalmatians, and Joan Castleman in The Wife. Glenn redefined the image of women in cinema. Not just beautiful, not merely dependent on men, but complex characters full of ambition, depth, and inner darkness. Her influence also extended to television, where Damages is regarded as one of the series that ushered in the golden age of American TV. Her portrayal of attorney Patty Hughes became a blueprint for sharp, powerful, multifaceted female leads, paving the way for many women-centered shows that followed. With more than 8 Oscar nominations, 3 Emmys, 3 Tonys, 3 Golden Globes, and dozens of other honors, Glenn Close is one of the few artists to have firmly established herself across all 3 domains: stage, film, and television. But her legacy is not confined to art. By founding Bring Change to Mind, Glenn transformed personal pain into collective strength, helping to dismantle the stigma surrounding mental health. With campaigns that reached billions, school programs across the United States, and measurable impact on young people, she became one of Hollywood's most powerful social voices. At the same time, her commitment to animal rights, environmental causes, and arts education shows that Glenn never locked herself into the movie star box, but always saw art and social responsibility as inseparable. The legacy Glenn Close leaves behind is a tapestry of brilliance and shadow, a star who refused to retreat, a woman who turned wounds into creative power, and a citizen who used her name to fight for community. To audiences, she is not merely an actress. She is a symbol of resilience, of pain transfigured into art, and of the belief that even when the Oscar statuette turns its back, history will still remember Glenn Close. There are people who pass through life leaving a brief burst of fireworks before fading. But there are also people like Glenn Close, who need no fireworks, no medals, yet leave others with a lingering ache each time their name is remembered. Her career is like a mirror, dazzling light in front, untouchable darkness behind. And it is precisely that duality that gives her a magnetism so enduring that even time cannot erase it. And what about you? When you think of Glenn Close, is the first thing that comes to mind an unforgettable role? The loneliness behind the glory, or the resilience that rose above it all? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue this journey together through stories full of light, but also heavy with shadow.